Right, will we make a start? So Zara, if you're all right, yeah.
Yep.
We have a number of people in here, so I'll make a start on it. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to the first presentation in our webinar series. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniel Hogan. I am the CIWEM Northern Ireland branch chairman. So the purpose of this series will be to complement our 2020-2021 technical programme with the theme of water and the environment adapting to change. So as part of this lunchtime webinar series, CIWEM Northern Ireland are hoping to run at least one presentation a month between now and next July. And we'll be covering a range of interesting topics such as climate change, bog restoration, flooding, and coastal erosion, to name just a few. So for those of you who are linked in with us or follow our Twitter feed, you can keep an eye on that for all upcoming events. And for those of you who are not, please feel free to link in with us or follow us on Twitter. Our LinkedIn code is CIWEM Northern Ireland branch, and our Twitter is CIWEM_NI. So just a few housekeeping rules. This event has been recorded, so keep your microphone on mute at all times. Also, there'll be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to add a few questions using the Q&A box below. So without further ado, I'd like to present Zara Morgan. Zara is a project engineer working in the water environment and flood risk management section of RPS in Belfast. So during her time in RPS, she's gained quite a lot of experience in flood risk assessment, optioneering, and coastal engineering. So Zara was the winner of the new members papers competition with her paper titled Ballater Flood Protection Study, developing options to mitigate flood risk, which she will share with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Zara, and she's going to give us her presentation on the Ballater Flood Protection Study. So.
Yep. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you to you and to CIWEM for inviting me back to give my presentation again. So as Daniel said, I'm presenting the Ballater Flood Protection Scheme, which I was heavily involved with, particularly in the development of the options to mitigate the flood risk. So we were actually, RPS were appointed to the study in about June 2017, and it was just submitted at the end of last year. So it's quite a long running project. So maybe first of all, I'll just give a little bit of an overview of the flood risk in Scotland. They completed their latest national flood risk assessment in 2018, which estimated that there's nearly 300,000 properties at risk of flooding in Scotland, which equates to about 1 in 11 homes and 1 in 7 businesses. Because of this, the Scottish Government have pledged over £420 million to protect homes and businesses over the next 10 years. And climate change is a big factor, especially with the increasing magnitude and frequency of big storm events that we're seeing. Because of this, the risk is expected to increase by about 110,000 properties by the year 2080. And at Ballater, the challenge was because they have experienced a really significant flood event in the last number of years, during Storm Frank especially, was to try to strike the balance between delivering a scheme on the ground as soon as possible, whilst also not compromising the natural environment for future generations. So in other words, trying to deliver a sustainable flood solution. So a little bit more about Ballater itself. It is located in the northeast of Scotland, up here in the Cairngorms National Park, just downstream of Balmoral Castle. The River Dee is the main river which flows through the town, as you can see here. And it has 2 main tributaries, which are the Mick, just coming in off the screen here, and the Gairn, which is coming in from the northeast, just off the screen there. So overall, the main 3 stages of the study, the first stage was completing the hydrological assessment, which included reviewing the peak flows in each of the catchments and coming up with a range of flows for a range of return period events. And then following on from that was the model build and the calibration against these historic flood events, and getting our flood extents for the range of return period events that we'd looked at. And then the final stage, which I'm going to focus on, is the option appraisal, which included our economic assessment and the cost of our potential scheme and cost benefit ratio. So the need for the Ballater study was identified in its local flood risk management plan, and it couldn't really have come any quicker for Ballater, as they suffered really extensive flood damage during Storm Frank in December 2015. So you can see from this video, even static caravans were washed into the River Dee and crashed into the Royal Bridge at Ballater. So this return period event was estimated at about a 1 in 170 year. So it really was a really huge storm event. So for the option appraisal, I followed the Scottish Government's guidance, which was split into 3 stages. So stage 1 there being defining the purpose, stage 2 being to develop, describe and value, and stage 3 was to compare and select the most sustainable solution. So for stage 1, first of all, we reviewed the flood extent for 1 in 200 year, and we're able to split it into 4 separate flood cells based on the flooding mechanism and where the receptors were. So flood cell 1 was the main one, which covered the main Ballater town, and then we had a few outlying flood cells. Flood cell 2 here on the Mick, one of the tributaries, flood cell 3 on the Gairn, and 4 was just upstream on the Dee at Paulhollick. And through our damage assessment, we identified nearly 700 properties that were at risk of flooding, which equated to a total potential avoided damage of almost 33 million. And then some of the key receptors which were at risk here during this flood event was the main A93 road in and out of Ballater, and also all their emergency services. So the fire station and the police station were also located in the floodplain. So this just shows a closer look at the flood cell 1, which was the main Ballater town. So you can just see here all the red and green points are all the residential and commercial properties which were at risk of flooding. And then you can also see the extent of the flood extent in blue, covering most of the golf course here, and also the caravan park, which was where the static caravans were washed into the river. So stage 2 then was our develop, describe and value. So we identified a comprehensive long list of actions, which we were then able to screen down into our short list, so removing any options that were technically unfeasible or inappropriate. And then from our shortlist, we were able to develop our final options. So I'll not go through each of these actions, but I'll maybe focus on some of the things that we had to do differently for Ballater. Quite early on in the study, we realised that to provide an acceptable standard of protection, that any scheme was going to have direct defences forming a major part. So maybe talk about some of these combinations of actions which we assessed. So first of all, highlighting the storage areas which we identified within the Dee catchment. Through modelling, I calculated that in order to reduce the height of the hard defences required here at Ballater by 1 metre, you would have to store approximately 32 million cubic metres of water within the Dee catchment, which roughly equals 13,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, which is a lot of water. Another option which we assessed in combination, which was quite popular with the public, was the addition of an extra arch at the Royal Bridge. As you can see in the picture here, the public thought the bridge was a constriction to the flow during these high flood events, and through modelling I identified that if you did add an extra arch on the end of the bridge, it would only convey about 5% of the peak flow, and wouldn't really help to reduce the water levels at the bridge during these really high flow flood events. And another option which was always popular with the public is dredging. So for modelling, I identified that if you dredged the entire modelled length of the River Dee by 1.5 metres, you could achieve a standard of protection of a 1 in 50 year. But the major morphological instability that might cause quickly ruled that out. And also, as the River Dee is an SAC, there's salmon and freshwater pearl mussels, so that would be very destructive to their habitats. And also through a CBEC assessment that was carried out, this identified here in orange that a large chunk of the River Dee was actually dominated by storage processes. So if you were trying to maintain a dredged level, you would have to be doing that frequently, which would be pretty unsustainable and would only provide temporary flood relief. So it was ruled out quite quickly. So as I mentioned, the direct defences were going to have to form a major part of any viable flood scheme. So we undertook an iterative process and looked at a range of standards of protection to try and find a solution for Ballater. We also looked at a number of different routes, so mainly going through the golf course, and also looked at trying to landscape the defences sympathetically into the golf course to try and maintain the amenity value of the golf course. And we also looked at a number of alternative solutions, so including self-closing barriers, which would automatically rise with the rising water levels, so would not require any manual intervention. And we also looked at replacing some of the high points in the defences with glass walls. So this was our list of options which we came up with. The due minimum we maintained just as our baseline for comparison with the other options. And then we had the main difference between the other options was the combination of the different types of defences which we used and how the properties in the outlying flood cells were protected. And then we also included this option 1B with the storage in combination with direct defences so that it could be compared against the others. So just going through here, some of the types of direct defences which we considered. These were our traditional ones, so our concrete wall with a toe and our clay embankment. The next one was the self-closing flood barriers. So on the left here, you can see an example of the steel cassette that was used, that would be used for the self-closing barriers, and then the top part would rise with the rising water levels. And then you can see on the right here an example of how this was incorporated into a scheme at Stonehaven in Scotland. And then this is just an example of the glass walls, so how it could be incorporated on top of traditional looking defences. So maybe just looking at the options in a bit more detail. So option 1, the defences generally wrapped around the area at risk through the golf course. And option 1 was just traditional defences only, and would have consisted of about 2 kilometres of flood wall and 2.7 kilometres of flood embankment. And then the outlying properties in flood cells 2, 3 and 4 were also protected through direct defences. And all of the options involved relocating some properties, so the caravan park and the emergency services would be relocated to an area outside of the floodplain so that they would always be available to help in an emergency. Option 2 then was similar, just some of the high points in the defences were replaced with self-closing barriers to try and retain some of the amenity value of the town. So in the times of no flood, then the visual height of the defences would be lower. Option 3 then was similar again, just the high points in the defences were replaced with glass walls. So then again, you're retaining some of the amenity value of the town and not losing the connection with the river. And the A options are the same as their other without A options, apart from the outlying properties in flood cells 3 and 4 were recommended for either property level protection or resilience measures. So properties which had a flood depth of less than 0.6 of a metre were recommended for PLP, which is something like floodgates at your door. And then the resilience measures were recommended if the flood depth was above 0.6 of a metre. So that's something like raising your electrical sockets so that less damage would be caused in the event of a flood. So 2A then again similar, just with the self-closing barriers and the softer engineering measures in flood cells 3 and 4. And 3A then again just with the glass walls and the softer measures at the outlying flood cells. And then option 1B we included just so that we could cost how much it would be to dam that huge volume of water in the D catchment. And then also to make room for these storage areas, you'd also have to relocate about 30 properties in the catchment. So stage 3 then, we compared and selected the most sustainable options. So there was a number of aspects which we looked at. So whether the options had any uncertainties or adverse impacts, and what the risks were associated with them. Did they meet our objectives that we'd set at the start of the study, and how good a value for money they offered. So just looking at the value for money then, you can just see the cost and the benefit associated with each option, and then their cost benefit ratio. So options 1, 1A and 3A performed the best. And then you can see that 1B, which was our storage option, you can see the huge cost. It's over 100 million associated with creating all those dammed areas in the D catchment. So finally then, our preferred option to find this, we completed a multi-criteria analysis just against all those aspects which I'd mentioned, and option 3A performed the best. So this was the option with the traditional hard defences with glass walls, and then the softer engineering measures in flood cells 3 and 4, and then of course with those properties relocated as well, the emergency services and the caravan park. So just some recommendations. I'll not go through all of these. I kind of just put these up to highlight how complex this study was and the amount of recommendations that went along with our final report for further work to complete as part of the study. For example, undertaking a morphodynamic modelling study because the day was so dynamic, especially after Storm Frank. Also, the further consideration of NFM, as we did create a long list of potential opportunities, so that we recommended this was further considered. And then other things, standard things such as ground investigations and the likes. So in conclusion then, it was a very complex study, and we had quite a number of conflicting priorities between SEPA and the council and homeowners in Ballater. And due to the dynamic nature of the River Dee following Storm Frank, it was difficult to fully understand what the morphological impacts would be from implementing a scheme on this scale. And I think the key to progressing that study now is approval and further study, working with all the interested parties to clear any question of negative impacts in the future, whether these are morphological or economic. So you can see on the screen here a makeup of what the defences would look like, and the flood event coming in and then clearing away again. So the next stage of the study, it was submitted to SEPA for prioritisation at the end of last year, and then this feeds directly into the Scottish Government's allocation for funding within their next 6-year cycle for their flood protection schemes. So that's me. Thank you for listening and happy to take any questions.
Sarah, that was a very, very good presentation. Very, very comprehensive analysis of options and everything that goes with it, you know, and particularly like that visual at the end. It sort of gives you just an idea of how if it went ahead, how it would just blend nicely into the environment, that wall. And but yeah, in terms of questions, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box below. But I guess in the absence of any questions, that either means that you've covered everything really, really well and nobody has any. It also means that I have to come up with a question. So I suppose the easiest one, well, not the easiest one, hopefully this isn't too out there, but how did you cost the direct offences against each other? Just to notice from your optioneer and your costings.
Yeah, so those kind of innovative solutions, the self-closing barriers and the glass walls, we actually went directly to the supplier in England to get kind of a cost of what that would be to include in the scheme. So we got cost for those directly from the supplier because we hadn't used that before in any scheme. And then for the other traditional defences, we had costs from previous jobs that we were able to put in to complete our costing.
No, that's very good. There's one question in. Why did you choose to place the defences through the golf course rather than hugging the urban area?
That's a good question. I think whenever at the beginning of the project, we did have two kind of rough placements of the defences, one hugging the urban area and one going around the outside edge of the golf course. But whenever you put the defences quite close to the urban area, the depth of the water that you got there was really high in places, which would be quite dangerous if you were on the other side. And then I think there were some high points in the golf course that would be better use of the space to build on higher points of the ground rather than building on low points.
Oh, that's very good. Thank you very much, Zara. A good presentation. There is a question there on the chat box. What was the golf course's view on defence alignment? Did they have any input in terms of the?
Yeah, we did go to public consultation, and it was a bit of a mix of people being happy that if they were directly impacted by the flooding, they were happy just because their homes would be protected. But then the golfers, some of them were a bit unhappy that the defences would be going through their golf course. But then we tried to explain that the alignment of the defences aren't set in stone and they can be changed and sympathetically landscaped into the course. I know at home for me, some of the golf courses have embankments landscaped in with the holes going up the other side of the river and the embankment. So I think once we explained that to them, that you know everything wasn't set in stone, they were happy enough.
Oh, very good. I think that we'll call it at that. But no, that's really, really good presentation and really good answering of the questions. So well done on that, and kept it quite nice and short. I'm conscious it's everyone's lunchtime as well, so we won't keep anyone away. But just a note of thanks to yourself and to Barbara in CIWEM headquarters for coming out today and actually doing a really, really good presentation and giving everyone good flavour of the sort of works you're doing, and really well done. In terms of any upcoming events, we've got a range of upcoming events, but one really, really interesting one that's coming up on the 2nd of December at the slightly earlier time at 5 o'clock is our Technical Talk 2, which will be the Living with Water in Belfast, an integrated plan for drainage and wastewater management in Greater Belfast. So this technical talk will be presented by David Compston and Stuart Whiteman for the Department of for Infrastructure, Living with Water Programme Division, and will be supported by our ex-chairman Richard Bingham of RPS. So this presentation will be on the recently published plan, Living with Water in Belfast, an integrated plan for drainage and wastewater management in Greater Belfast. So that's coming up on the 2nd of December at 5 o'clock. It will be via Zoom, and booking is essential. So book on as early as you can using the CIWEM booking booking page, and the link will be made available on our LinkedIn page this afternoon. In terms of the new members papers competition, so Zara, as I mentioned previously, was the winner of this year's presentation. It was a really tight presentation. Everyone was 8 contestants narrowed down to 4 for the final, if my memory serves me correctly. So it was very tough competition. But so Zara won that one outright. But if anyone out there would like to get involved in the incoming one, we'll be opening. You'd like to send your interest to me, Daniel Hogan, or daniel.hogan@rpsgroup.com. The details will be made available via email and via LinkedIn and Twitter. So you're in with a chance to win £250 and be recognised as the champion of the new members papers competition. So if anyone's interested in that, please keep an eye on our social network pages. And finally, in terms of chartership, if anyone out there is thinking about going for chartership or at a stage where they want to submit their paperwork and would like someone to within the CIWEM branch to review it, or have any queries or anything related to the process, again, please feel free to contact myself or any member of the CIWEM branch that you're aware of. But again, it's our hope that CIWEM Northern Ireland helps anyone as best they can to achieve chartered status. So that's pretty much all from me. I won't take any more of your lunch hour. Thanks again for joining in, and that's it. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right, that went well. Really good. And you had, in the end, about 47 people.
Very good. That's good numbers. Very good. Very well done, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Very interesting.
Got it, super.
I was just wondering, with the catchment, you've got obviously three catchments flowing into the town and contributing to the problem. Can there be any natural flood catchment work done upstream which would reduce the flow?
Natural flood management works, did you say? Yeah, we did look at that. I think just because of the sheer volume of water that you're getting in those huge return period events, I think down at the bridge there, the flow is about 1200 cumex. So I think the measures would just have to be so substantial to provide a high standard of protection. But yeah, we did recommend putting in some of those, and actually when you drive through you can see that they've done an awful lot of planting already in those catchments.
I think that there's a sort of drive, isn't there, to try and do that as well. So if they can do that, and that helps as well.
Mm-hmm.
That reduces.
Yeah.
Very good.
I've published your event for the Living Water in Belfast event.
Okay, very good.
I'm hoping to send out an email today, but I'm on leave tomorrow, so. Okay.
No, that's great. I mean, I think there's a good update using our LinkedIn pages and our Twitter feed, so it's quite good in that sense. But yeah, that's good.
And I put in the chat, I put the link to the page.
Okay.
Your event, Living.
Yes, indeed. No, that's great. That's perfect. Listen, I'm going to jump off, guys. It's half, and I don't know, we're still broadcasting or not. I don't know. They take off the tail end before we go to YouTube. But listen, thanks again, everyone. It's really good, and I'll talk soon. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.